You were taught that living for yourself is the beginning of moral collapse, that selfishness corrodes the soul, that a life oriented around your own needs, your own expansion, your own sovereignty is a pathology to be corrected. And you believed it, not because it was true, but because the people who taught you needed you to believe it. Let's be precise. Morality, as you've inherited it, is not a guide to human flourishing. It's a resource extraction system. Every sermon about selflessness, every guilt trip about putting others first, every cultural narrative that frames self-priority as darkness, these are not ethical revelations. They are tools, and the hand holding those tools belongs to someone who benefits from your compliance. Machiavelli understood this with surgical clarity. He observed that the men who preached virtue in public were the same men who practiced ruthless self-interest in private. Princes who spoke of justice while poisoning rivals, priests who demanded humility while accumulating wealth. The morality they sold to the masses was not the morality they lived by. It was a cage, and you were born inside it. Consider the logic you've been fed. Sacrifice your time so others can build their dreams. Sacrifice your energy so others can feel supported. Sacrifice your resources so the collective can thrive. And when you hesitate, when you feel the instinct to prioritize yourself, you're told that instinct is proof of your brokenness. That guilt you feel, it's not divine, it's conditioning. It's the alarm system installed by people who need you to stay in place. The inversion is this: what you call selflessness is often self-abandonment. What you call generosity is often resource leakage. What you call morality is often just obedience dressed in spiritual language. You've been taught to see yourself as a servant to the collective, a node in a network that extracts value from you and redistributes it to those who contribute less, demand more, and moralize louder. Now ask yourself who benefits from this system, not you. You're exhausted, resentful, watching others advance while you hold the infrastructure of their lives together. The people who benefit are the ones you're serving. The family member who calls only when they need something. The friend who takes but never reciprocates. The ideology that insists you owe the world your diminishment. Living for yourself is not the rejection of morality. It's the rejection of a rigged moral framework designed to keep you useful and non-threatening. Machiavelli didn't advocate cruelty for its own sake. He advocated clear-sightedness. He insisted that the prince must see the world as it is, not as poets and priests say it should be. And what he saw was simple. Power flows to those who prioritize their own survival and expansion. Virtue, in the classical sense, meant strength. Somewhere along the way, it was redefined to mean submission. You've been living under an inverted moral hierarchy, one that punishes self-preservation and rewards self-erasure, one that calls you selfish for setting boundaries and noble for being depleted. This is not an accident, this is design, and the moment you see it, the guilt begins to crack. The truth is this: living for yourself is not a sin. It's a prerequisite for agency. You cannot build power from a foundation of self-betrayal. You cannot construct sovereignty while operating as someone else's resource. The people who told you otherwise were not protecting your soul. They were protecting their access to your labor, your attention, your compliance. Machiavelli's insight was radical because it stripped away the fiction. He said the quiet part out loud. The world is governed by self-interest, and those who deny this are either naive or lying. The naive become victims, the liars become predators, and you, conditioned to suppress your own instincts, have been kept somewhere in between, useful but not dangerous, generous but not free. This chapter is your lens shift. The morality you inherited is not neutral. It's a weapon aimed at you. And the first act of sovereignty is recognizing who handed you the weapon and asked you to hold it against yourself. There is an instinct inside you that you've been trained to suppress. It's older than the morality you were taught, older than the guilt, the shame, the social scripts that tell you to diminish yourself for the comfort of others. It's the instinct for sovereignty, the drive to prioritize your survival, your expansion, your control over your own existence. And it's not a defect, it's design. Every living organism operates on a hierarchy of needs. The self comes first. Not because of cruelty, but because of logic. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot protect others if you are destroyed. You cannot build anything lasting if your foundation is made of self, sacrifice, and resentment. Nature does not reward martyrs. It rewards organisms that survive, adapt, and expand. This is not philosophy. This is biology. Machiavelli observed this in the political arena, but the principle applies universally. The prince who neglects his own power in favor of appearing virtuous does not become a saint, he becomes conquered. His rivals, unburdened by self-imposed moral constraints, absorb his territory and erase his legacy. The same mechanism operates in your life. The person who prioritizes everyone else becomes the person everyone else uses. Not because people are inherently evil, but because systems optimize for extraction, and you've been signaling availability. The sovereignty instinct is what tells you to guard your time, to set boundaries, to say no without justification, to arrange your life around your goals rather than the expectations of others. And every time you feel that instinct, you've been taught to interpret it as selfishness. That interpretation is not accidental, it's installed. Because the moment you stop suppressing that instinct, you stop being manageable. Let's be clear, this instinct does not make you a sociopath. It makes you functional. The sociopath lacks empathy entirely. You have empathy. You've simply been conditioned to weaponize it against yourself. You feel guilt when you prioritize your needs. You feel shame when you refuse to sacrifice. That guilt and shame are not evidence of morality. They're evidence of social conditioning designed to keep you in a subordinate position. Consider the language you use when you finally prioritize yourself. You apologize. You justify. You soften the boundary with explanations, as if your own needs require a defense. Why? Because you've internalized the belief that your existence is secondary, that your wants are negotiable, that your time and energy belong to anyone who asks, and withholding them is a moral failure. This is not humility. This is domestication. The sovereignty instinct is what remains when you strip away the performance. It's the part of you that knows, without needing permission, that your life is yours, that you are not obligated to hemorrhage resources to prove your worth. That reciprocity is not optional, it's structural. You give to those who give back. You invest in systems that yield returns. You withdraw from arrangements that drain you. This is not cold. This is coherent. Machiavelli wrote that the prince must learn to be not good when necessary. This phrase has been misunderstood for centuries. He did not mean the prince should be evil. He meant the prince should be willing to act in his own interest, even when it violates the expectations of those who benefit from his self-sacrifice. The prince who cannot do this does not remain virtuous, he remains conquered, and you are no different. Your sovereignty instinct is not asking you to harm others. It's asking you to stop harming yourself. It's the voice that says, this relationship is one-sided and you are the side being drained. This job extracts more than it returns. This obligation was never yours to carry. And when you listen to that voice, when you act on it, the people who benefited from your suppression will call it selfishness. They will moralize, they will guilt, because your sovereignty threatens their supply. But here's what they won't tell you. Their moral outrage is not about ethics. It's about access. They are not offended by your selfishness. They are offended by your unavailability. The moment you prioritize yourself, you stop being a resource they can harvest without cost. And they will frame your boundary as betrayal, your self-interest as pathology, your sovereignty as proof that something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. What's wrong is the system that convinced you to override your instincts in service of others' comfort. The sovereignty instinct is not the problem. The suppression of it is. And every day you spend overriding that instinct is a day you spend managing someone else's life while yours stagnates. Machiavelli's insight was not that self-interest is good or bad. It was that self-interest is inevitable. The only question is whether you will acknowledge it and act strategically, or deny it and act reactively. The people who deny it become martyrs, the people who acknowledge it become sovereigns, and the gap between those two identities is not moral, it's tactical. You are not built to serve indefinitely. You were built to survive, expand, and protect what you've built. That's not selfishness, that's the operating system. And the moment you stop apologizing for it, the moment you stop translating your needs into terms others will accept, you stop being a resource and start being a force. Every social system sorts people into roles, not explicitly, not with titles or announcements, but through behavior, through patterns of exchange, through who gives and who takes and who enforces the terms. And in the system you're navigating right now, there are three archetypes that matter: the sacrifice, the parasite, and the sovereign. You are currently one of them, and the others are watching. The sacrifice is the identity you were groomed into. This is the person who operates as infrastructure for other people's lives. The one who shows up, who gives without tracking return, who absorbs the emotional and logistical labor that no one else wants to carry. The sacrifice believes this is virtue, that selflessness is the highest form of character, that being needed is the same as being valued. It's not being needed is being used with your consent. The sacrifice is not chosen because they are good. They are chosen because they are available, because they signal that their resources, time, energy, attention, money, are accessible without cost. They do not set boundaries. They do not enforce reciprocity. They do not audit the relationships they're in to see if the flow of value is mutual. And because they don't, the system optimizes around them. The sacrifice becomes the load bearer, the emotional dumping ground, the person everyone calls when they need something but no one calls to celebrate. You know this role. You've lived it. And the cruelest part is that the sacrifice is conditioned to see their exploitation as purpose. They frame their depletion as service, their exhaustion as proof they're doing something meaningful. But meaning is not the same as being drained, And the moment you stop performing the sacrifice role, you will discover how many of your relationships were built on extraction, not connection. The parasite is the second archetype. This is the person who has learned to extract value without providing it. They are not inherently evil, they are simply optimizing. They have identified people like you, people who give without demanding return, and they have structured their lives around that axis. The parasite does not ask if you have capacity. They assume it. They do not track what they take because they have no incentive to. You have never made them pay a cost. The parasite is often charming, often needy, often framed as a victim of circumstance who just needs a little more help, a little more time, a little more patience. And you give it not because you're stupid, but because you've been taught that withholding help is cruelty, that boundaries are selfishness, that if you don't save them, you've failed morally. This is the lie that keeps the parasite fed. Machiavelli would tell you this: the parasite is not your responsibility. They are a strategic problem. And the solution is not more giving, it's withdrawal. The parasite thrives in environments where the sacrifice refuses to enforce consequences, where guilt can be weaponized, where the sacrifice mistakes depletion for duty. The moment you stop being available without cost, the parasite moves on, not because you've harmed them, but because you've stopped being useful. The third archetype is the sovereign. This is the identity you're moving toward, whether you know it or not. The sovereign is not selfish in the way you've been taught to fear. They are not cruel, isolating, or nihilistic. They are simply operating from a different framework: reciprocity, strategy, and self-priority. The sovereign gives, but only to those who give back. They invest, but only in systems that yield returns. They are available, but their availability has a price. The sovereign understands what the sacrifice does not. That generosity without boundaries is not virtue, it's self-destruction. That people will take as much as you allow them to take, not because they are evil, but because that is how incentive structures work. The sovereign does not moralize about this. They simply adjust their behavior accordingly. They guard their time. They audit their relationships. They withdraw from arrangements that do not serve them. And they do this without guilt, because they recognize that their sovereignty is the foundation of everything else they build. Machiavelli's prince is a sovereign, not because he is heartless, but because he refuses to let sentiment override strategy. The prince who sacrifices his power to appear virtuous does not become beloved. He becomes irrelevant. His throne is taken, his legacy erased, and the people he sacrificed for move on without him because they were never loyal to him. They were loyal to what he provided. You are watching this play out in your own life. The people you've sacrificed for do not celebrate your selflessness. They expect it. The moment you stop giving, they do not ask what's wrong with them. They ask what's wrong with you. Because in their framework you exist to serve, and your refusal to continue serving is not boundary setting, it's betrayal. The shift from sacrifice to sovereign is not moral, it's mechanical. You stop interpreting your needs as negotiable. You stop translating your boundaries into language others will approve of. You stop performing availability for people who would not do the same for you. And the moment you make that shift, the parasites will label you selfish, cold, changed. They are correct. You have changed. You have stopped being infrastructure and started being sovereign. Here is the map. The sacrifice is consumed. The parasite consumes. The sovereign decides who gets access and under what terms. You were the sacrifice. You've been surrounded by parasites, and the only question now is whether you have the will to become the sovereign. Not because it is kind, not because it is comfortable, but because it is the only role that allows you to keep what you build. The three archetypes are not moral categories, they are strategic positions, and you are not locked into the one you were assigned. You are locked in only as long as you continue to behave like the sacrifice. The moment you stop, the system recalibrates. The parasites withdraw, and the sovereign emerges not as a villain, but as someone who finally understands that their life belongs to them. History does not remember the selfless, it remembers the strategic, the names carved into empire, into legacy, into the architecture of power. They do not belong to martyrs. They belong to men and women who understood a simple, unspoken truth. The world is not governed by the morality it preaches. It is governed by the self-interest it practices. And those who deny this do not inherit the earth. They fertilize it. Machiavelli did not invent this observation. He simply had the audacity to document it. When he wrote The Prince, he was not teaching cruelty. He was teaching pattern recognition. He looked at the men who rose to power and the men who were destroyed, and he extracted the variables. The virtuous princes, the ones who ruled with kindness and trust and moral clarity, were overthrown, poisoned, betrayed by the very people they treated with generosity. The ruthless princes, the ones who prioritized their own survival and expansion, built dynasties. Not because they were better people, because they were better strategists. Consider Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli's model. Brutal, calculating, willing to eliminate threats before they materialized. He did not wait for betrayal, he anticipated it. He did not forgive disloyalty, he made examples of it. And while he ruled, his territory was stable. His enemies were silent. His people were safe, not because he loved them, but because he understood that security requires force. The moment he softened, the moment he trusted the wrong ally, his empire collapsed. The lesson is not that cruelty works. The lesson is that self-priority works, and sentiment unchecked is a liability. Rome understood this at a structural level. The Roman Republic did not expand through diplomacy alone. It expanded through calculated violence, strategic alliances that served Roman interests, and a willingness to annihilate threats without hesitation. The Romans did not apologize for prioritizing Rome. They built roads, laws, aqueducts, and military infrastructure that served their dominance. And the civilizations that tried to oppose them with moral arguments, with appeals to fairness, with trust in treaties, they were absorbed. Erased footnotes. The pattern repeats. The British Empire did not become the largest in history by being kind. It extracted resources, labor, and strategic territory from populations that could not resist. And the architects of that empire, men like Cecil Rhodes, like Clive of India, did not lie awake tormented by guilt. They framed their extraction as civilization, as progress, as a burden they were morally obligated to carry. The rhetoric was virtuous, the behavior was ruthless, and the empire rewarded the behavior, not the rhetoric. Move forward, look at corporate structures, the modern arenas of power. The executives who rise are not the ones who sacrifice their goals for team morale. They are the ones who take credit, who eliminate rivals, who position themselves strategically and strike when opportunity opens. The language in boardrooms is cooperative synergy, collaboration, shared success, but the mechanics are Darwinian. Resources flow to those who secure them. Promotions go to those who make themselves indispensable and their competitors replaceable. The ones who play by the stated rules, who trust the meritocracy narrative, plateau. The ones who play by the real rules, who understand that advancement is a zero, some game disguised as a team sport, ascend. This is not pessimism, this is observation. Machiavelli was not a cynic, he was a realist. He saw that human systems, regardless of the moral language layered on top, operate on incentive structures. And those structures reward self-priority, not always, not universally, but consistently enough that the pattern is undeniable. The people who win are not the people who play fair. They are the people who play smart, and fairness in their framework is what you sell to others while you position yourself. Look at the people in your own life who have accumulated the most wealth, status, freedom, influence. Are they the most selfless, or are they the most strategic? Are they the ones who gave endlessly, or the ones who gave selectively to those who could give back? You already know the answer. You've been conditioned not to say it out loud, because saying it out loud means admitting that the morality you've been practicing is a losing strategy. The historical record is clear. Self-sacrifice at scale produces saints and corpses. Self-interest, executed with intelligence, produces legacy. The saints are venerated after death. The strategists are venerated during life. And if you're still operating under the assumption that the universe rewards good intentions, you are not naive. You are dangerous to yourself. Because the world you're living in does not run on the principles you were taught. It runs on the principles Machiavelli observed 5 centuries ago. And those principles have not changed. The empires that prioritized their own expansion survived. The empires that prioritized the comfort of their enemies did not. The leaders who acted in their own strategic interest built dynasties. The leaders who acted in accordance with the morality their subjects preached were deposed. This is not a moral claim. This is a historical one. And the moment you accept it, the moment you stop arguing with reality, you stop being a victim of it. Machiavelli's final insight was this: the gap between how people live and how they say you should live is where you are exploited. The preacher who tells you to turn the other cheek does not turn his own. The politician who campaigns on fairness does not distribute his own resources fairly. The friend who insists you should always be available does not offer the same availability in return. They are not hypocrites by accident. They are strategists by design, and they are counting on you to follow the rules they only pretend to honor. History is not a record of moral victories. It is a record of strategic ones. And the men who understood this, who shed the illusion that the world operates on fairness, are the men who shaped history. The rest were shaped by it. You are standing at the same choice they faced. You can continue to operate as if self-sacrifice is rewarded. Or you can accept that the game has always been about self-priority, and the only people who lose are the ones who refuse to see the board. Knowing the game is rigged is not enough. You can see the pattern, understand the mechanics, recognize that self-priority is how power operates, and still fail. Because awareness without strategy is just intellectual posturing. You need a recalibration, not a moral one. A tactical one. You need to learn how to live for yourself without collapsing the structures you depend on. How to extract value without triggering the immune response of the people around you. How to become sovereign without becoming isolated. This is where most people fail. They swing too hard. They go from self-sacrifice to scorched earth from sacrifice to isolated narcissist, skipping the sovereign entirely. They burn relationships, alienate allies, and end up alone, not because they prioritize themselves, but because they prioritize themselves stupidly. Machiavelli's prince does not announce his self-interest. He conceals it beneath the performance of virtue. He appears cooperative while operating strategically. He gives the impression of generosity while ensuring every gift has a return. The first principle of strategic recalibration is opacity. You do not announce your shift. You do not tell people you're done being their resource. You do not post about boundaries, declare your sovereignty, or explain your new framework, because the moment you announce it, you invite resistance. The parasites will mobilize. The people who benefit from your sacrifice will moralize, guilt, and pressure you back into position. Instead, you simply become less available, slowly, quietly, without explanation. You stop answering every message immediately. You stop saying yes to every request. You stop volunteering for the labor no one else wants. And when people ask why, you do not justify. You do not apologize. You say you're busy. You say you'll check your schedule. You deflect with politeness, not with truth. Because the truth, I'm no longer prioritizing your needs above my own, is a declaration of war, and war is inefficient. The second principle is selective reciprocity. You do not withdraw from everyone, you withdraw from the people who only take. You audit your relationships with cold precision. Who gives back? Who invests in you the way you invest in them? Who would help you the way you've helped them? And for the ones who fail that audit, you gradually reduce your investment. Not with confrontation, with distance. You become harder to reach, less responsive, more expensive in terms of time and energy. And you redirect those resources toward the people who reciprocate. This is not cruelty. This is efficiency. You are reallocating resources from losing investments to profitable ones. The people you withdraw from will notice. They will ask what's wrong, and your response is simple. Nothing's wrong. You're just busy. Because if you tell them the truth, that they've been extracting value without return, and you've decided to stop allowing it, they will not accept responsibility. They will make you the villain, so you deny them the confrontation. You just fade. The third principle is strategic generosity. The sovereign is not stingy. They give, but they give with intent. Every act of generosity is an investment. You help the people who can help you back. You give to those who are positioned to reciprocate, now or later. You build alliances, not dependencies. And you do this visibly enough that you maintain the appearance of being a good person, which is useful while ensuring that your generosity is never one-sided. Machiavelli understood this. The prince gives gifts to secure loyalty. He grants favors to create obligation. He appears magnanimous while calculating return. This is not manipulative. It is strategic, because generosity without strategy is just resource leakage. And resources are finite. The sacrifice gives until they have nothing left. The sovereign gives until the return stops, justifying the investment. Then they stop, and they do not feel guilty about it. The fourth principle is boundary enforcement without justification. You set limits. You say no, and you do not explain why, because the moment you explain, you invite negotiation. The parasite does not accept your no, they dismantle your reasoning, they find the gaps, they guilt you, pressure you, reframe your boundary as selfishness or cruelty or abandonment. So you stop giving them material to work with, You say, "I can't, I'm not available, that doesn't work for me." And when they push, you repeat. You do not elaborate, you do not defend, you simply hold the line. This will feel uncomfortable. You have been trained to justify your existence, to earn the right to say no, to prove that your needs are legitimate. That training is the leash, and the moment you stop justifying, the leash breaks. People will be confused. Some will be angry. The ones who respected you will adjust. The ones who exploited you will leave, and that sorting mechanism is the point. The fifth principle is resource guarding. Your time, your energy, your attention, your money, these are not infinite. And the people around you will consume them endlessly if you allow it. The sovereign treats these as assets to be protected, allocated strategically, and defended ruthlessly. You do not give your time to people who waste it. You do not give your energy to situations that drain it. You do not give your attention to dynamics that do not serve you. And you do not apologize for this. The sacrifice gives first and assesses later. The sovereign assesses first and gives selectively. This is the inversion. You stop assuming everyone deserves your resources by default. You make them earn access, not through cruelty, but through reciprocity. Show me you value what I give. Show me you'll give back. Show me this is mutual, and if they can't, you withdraw. Cleanly, quietly, permanently, the final principle is strategic visibility. You do not disappear entirely. You remain present in the environments that serve you. You maintain relationships that are reciprocal. You contribute where contribution is rewarded. You show up where your presence has value, but you stop being everywhere for everyone. You stop being the default option, the constant availability, the person who always says yes. You become selective. Intentional, expensive. This recalibration is not comfortable. It will trigger guilt. It will feel like betrayal. It will bring up every lesson you were taught about being good, about being there for people, about not being selfish. And you will have to override those feelings with logic, because those feelings are not moral guidance. They are the residue of your conditioning. They are the alarm system installed to keep you compliant. And every time you feel that guilt and act anyway, you weaken the system. Machiavelli's insight was not that you should be ruthless. It was that you should be strategic, that you should see the world clearly without the distortion of wishful morality and act in your own interest with precision. The sovereign does not announce their self-priority. They simply leave it, and the people around them either adjust or exit. Both outcomes are acceptable. You are not becoming a monster. You are becoming unavailable to people who treated you like a resource. You are not abandoning morality. You are abandoning a version of morality designed to keep you subordinate. And the people who accuse you of changing are correct. You have changed. You've stopped letting them take without cost. And that, to them, feels like cruelty. To you, it should feel like liberation. There is a version of you that needs to die. Not metaphorically, not as poetry, actually die. The version of you that believes self-sacrifice is noble. The version that interprets your own needs as negotiable. The version that feels guilt when you prioritize yourself and pride when you're depleted. That version of you is not a virtue, it's a liability, and as long as it survives, you will relapse. You will slide back into the sacrifice role. You will rationalize why this person, this situation, this obligation is different. And you will be consumed again. This is the most difficult part, not the strategy, not the boundary setting, not the withdrawal from parasites, The difficult part is killing the identity that made those behaviors feel wrong, because that identity is not just a set of belief, sits woven into how you see yourself. You've built your self-worth on being needed, on being the person who shows up, on being selfless. And now you're being told that the very thing you thought made you good is the thing that made you exploitable. Machiavelli's prince could not afford sentimentality, not because sentiment is weakness, but because sentiment without strategy is suicide. The prince who hesitates to eliminate a threat because it feels cruel does not remain virtuous. He remains dead. And you are operating in the same structure. The people who exploit you are not doing it maliciously. They are doing it because you allow it, and every time you allow it, you reinforce the pattern. You teach them that you are available without cost, that your boundaries are negotiable, that guilt is an effective tool. The old identity must die because it is the source of your compliance. It is the part of you that translates no into maybe, and maybe into yes. It is the part that believes other people's needs are more legitimate than your own. It is the part that feels selfish for wanting rest, for guarding time, for expecting reciprocity. And as long as that part of you is alive, you will self-sabotage. You will set a boundary and then apologize for it. You will withdraw from a parasite and then reach back out to check if they are okay. You will start becoming sovereign and then regress because the guilt feels unbearable. So you have to kill it, not suppress it, not manage it, kill it. And the way you kill it is through repeated action that contradicts its programming. You feel the guilt and you act anyway. You feel the urge to explain yourself and you stay silent. You feel the pull to sacrifice and you choose yourself. And every time you do this, the old identity weakens. Every time you override the conditioning, you install new wiring. And eventually the guilt stops coming. The urge to justify fades, and the new identity, the sovereign, becomes your default. This process will isolate you temporarily. The people who benefited from the old you will not celebrate the new you. They will mourn, they will express concern, they will tell you you've changed, and not as a compliment. They will say you're cold now, selfish, distant, and they will be right. You are distant from them. Because they were never close to you, they were close to what you provided, and now that the provision has stopped, the relationship has no foundation. Let them mourn, let them be confused. Let them tell others that you're not the person you used to be, because you're not. The person you used to be was a resource node. The person you're becoming is sovereign. And those two identities cannot coexist. One survives, one dies. And if you try to keep both alive, if you try to be sovereign in some areas and sacrifice in others, you will fracture. You will exhaust yourself trying to manage two incompatible operating systems. So you choose, and the choice is binary. The death of the old identity is not painless. You will grieve. You will feel like you're betraying yourself, even though you're doing the opposite. You will wonder if you're becoming the villain. You will question whether sovereignty is just a rationalization for cruelty. And in those moments, you will be tempted to go back, to soften, to compromise, to prove you're still good by slipping back into the sacrifice role. Just this once. Do not go back, because just this once is how the old identity resurrects itself. The parasite who you cut off will return with a crisis. The family member who drained you will call with an emergency. The friend who never reciprocated will need one more favor. And if you give it, you signal that the boundary was performative, that the withdrawal was temporary. That guilt still works, and they will not respect your sovereignty. They will test it, probe it, dismantle it. Machiavelli warned against half measures. The prince who injures an enemy but does not destroy him creates a vengeful survivor. The same applies here. If you set boundaries but do not enforce them, if you withdraw but keep reaching back, if you kill the old identity but allow it to resurrect, you do not become sovereign. You become unstable, unpredictable, and the people around you will learn that your no means maybe, that your boundaries are negotiable, that your sovereignty is theater. The old identity dies when you stop flinching, when you set the boundary and feel nothing, when the parasite leaves and you feel relief, not guilt, when someone calls you selfish and you do not defend yourself because you no longer need their approval. That is the moment of death. That is when the sacrifice is gone and the sovereign remains. And here is what no one tells you: the new identity is lighter. The sacrifice is exhausted, resentful, constantly managing other people's needs while their own life stagnates. The sovereign is clear, focused, free, not because they are isolated, but because they are selective. They have fewer relationships, but the ones they have are mutual. They give less, but what they give is valued. They are needed less, but respected more. You will not miss the old identity once it's gone. You will only miss it in the transition, when the guilt is loudest and the conditioning is still fighting for survival. But once you're through it, once the death is complete, you will look back at the person you were and feel something close to pity. Not because they were weak, but because they were operating in a system designed to consume them, and they did not know they had permission to leave. You have permission, you always did. The old identity convinced you otherwise. It convinced you that leaving, that prioritizing yourself, that becoming sovereign was a moral failure. It was not. It was the only rational response to a reality that rewards self-priority and punishes self-sacrifice. The old identity is dead. Stop trying to revive it. Stop trying to be both. Bury it and build the sovereign on the bones. You've reached the end, and now you split, not gradually, not eventually, right now, because there are two types of people who made it this far: the ones who will act and the ones who will rationalize their way back into the cage. The first type, the ones who will act, are already making adjustments. They've audited their relationships while reading this. They've identified the parasites. They've felt the old guilt rising and recognized it as conditioning, not conscience. They are not waiting for permission. They are not looking for a softer version of this message, one that lets them keep the sacrifice identity while pretending to be sovereign. They know the split is binary, and they've chosen. The second type will finish this script and do nothing. They will agree with the logic. They will recognize the patterns in their own life. They will nod at the Machiavellian framework, at the historical examples, at the strategic recalibration. And then they will return to the same behaviors. They will say yes to the next request. They will soften the next boundary. They will rationalize why this person, this situation, this obligation is different. And 6 months from now, they will be exactly where they are now, depleted, resentful, and wondering why nothing changes. Machiavelli did not write for the second type. He wrote for princes, for men who had the capacity and will to act. And within that group, he knew most would fail, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked the stomach to do what intelligence demanded. They would see the threat and hesitate. They would know the rival needed to be eliminated and delay. They would understand the principle and then flinch at the application, and those men did not build empires. They were footnotes in someone else's. You are at that point now. You understand the framework. You see the game. You know that the morality you were taught is a resource extraction system. You know that the sacrifice is consumed, the parasite extracts, and the sovereign decides. You know that history rewards self-priority and punishes self-abandonment. You know all of this. The question is whether you will act on it, or whether you will file it away as interesting theory and continue being useful to people who do not value you. Here is the filter. If you are still looking for permission, you are the second type. If you are still trying to find a version of this message that feels comfortable, that does not require you to disappoint people, that lets you be sovereign without anyone noticing, you are the second type. If you are waiting for the perfect moment, for the right circumstances, for the guilt to go away on its own, you are the second type. And you will stay where you are. The first type does not wait. They act immediately, not perfectly, not without discomfort, but they act. They identify one parasite and withdraw. They set one boundary without justification. They reallocate one block of time from someone else's priority to their own, and they do not announce it. They do not post about their journey. They simply become less available to the people who were draining them. And they observe the response, and they adjust. This is the selection, not moral, not based on who deserves sovereignty, based on who has the will to claim it. The people who deserve it but will not act do not get it. The people who act, even imperfectly, even with residual guilt, even while still learning, they get it. Because sovereignty is not awarded, it is taken, and the world does not stop you from taking it. It just makes you feel bad about it. And if that feeling is enough to stop you, you were never going to make it anyway. Machiavelli's final lesson is this: the gap between knowing and doing is where most people die. Not physically, but their potential dies, their agency dies. They become intelligent observers of their own exploitation. They see the pattern, understand the mechanics, and do nothing. And they spend the rest of their lives resenting the people who did act, calling them cold, calling them selfish, calling them ruthless, while secretly wishing they had the courage to do the same. You are not reading this by accident. You are here because some part of you is ready to stop being the sacrifice. But ready is not enough. Willingness is not enough. You need to act, and the action does not need to be large. It needs to be immediate. One boundary, one withdrawal, one decision where you prioritize yourself and do not apologize. That is the test. Not whether you agree with the framework, whether you will execute it. If you do nothing after this, if you close this video and return to the same patterns, then this was entertainment, intellectual stimulation, a brief departure from the comfortable lie that self-sacrifice is noble. And you will go back to being drained, to being needed but not valued, to building other people's lives while yours remains unbuilt. And that is fine. Most people choose that. Most people are the sacrifice. The system requires them. But if you are the first type, if you are the one who acts, then this is the beginning not of a journey, not of a transformation, of a recalibration. You will make mistakes. You will overcorrect. You will lose relationships that you thought mattered and realize they were built on extraction. You will feel guilt and act anyway. You will be called selfish and not defend yourself. And slowly, quietly, without fanfare, you will become sovereign. And when you do, you will look around and realize how few people made it, how many stayed behind, trapped in the same patterns, the same guilt, the same moral framework that keeps them compliant. And you will feel something between pity and indifference, not because you are cruel, but because you have limited resources and they chose not to act. They chose comfort over agency. They chose the familiar cage over the uncertain freedom, and you cannot save them. You can only save yourself. This is the final selection. You either act, or you were always going to stay where you are. There is no third option, no middle path, no way to be sovereign without becoming unavailable to the people who need you to stay the sacrifice. They will not give you permission. They will not celebrate your shift. They will resist guilt and moralize. And your sovereignty depends on acting anyway. Machiavelli did not write for everyone. He wrote for the few who could stomach the truth and execute it. This script is the same. If you are one of the few you already know, you are already moving. And you do not need this script to tell you what to do next. You need it to confirm what you already decided. If you are not one of the few, close this video, go back, be the sacrifice. It is a role the system needs, and most people are built for it. But do not return here later and ask why nothing changed. You were given the map. You chose not to walk.